Picture this: Myra in the heart of Lycia, during a winter so severe that even the sea seems to freeze mid-motion. The air bites your skin, and a pale moon hangs suspended over the silent rooftops. You walk along narrow streets carved from stone, and the sound of your footsteps echoes between the cold walls like the ticking of a clock marking forgotten hours. In the distance, the church bells toll faintly, calling the faithful to prayer, while a solitary figure in dark robes crosses the square. That figure is Nicholas, Bishop of Myra. His breath visible in the frost, his gaze calm yet heavy with thought. To the people, he is a holy man, a protector of sailors and children. But tonight, the city that venerates him sleeps under a wind that feels less like mercy and more like judgment. The olive trees bow under the icy rain, and in that solemn silence, his shadow seems longer than the body it belongs to. The man who would become a legend walks unseen through winding streets, unaware, or perhaps all too aware, that history watches from behind the veil of winter. You know this story, or you think you do. You've been told he brings gifts, laughter, and warmth. That every December he rides across the sky to reward the good and forgive the lost. But that is a comfortable lie, one patched together over centuries to soothe hearts afraid of the cold truth. The real story of St. Nicholas is not made of jingling bells and merry lights. It is forged from hunger, faith, and the fear of divine silence. This isn't the tale of Santa Claus. It's the tale of the man who walked among ghosts. Before we descend any deeper, before we open these forgotten scripts, I ask something of you. If you believe that the ancient, darker truths of history deserve to be remembered, lend your light to this archive. Like this video, subscribe, and keep the candle burning in the darkness. Your support allows us to walk these haunted roads of memory and keep alive the stories the frost has almost erased. Tonight, we will return to ancient Myra. We will trace the path of a man revered as a saint, but forged in cruelty and devotion. We will uncover the miracle that made him famous, the battles that scarred his faith, and the transformation that turned austerity into myth. And in the quiet after, we will ask what was lost when holiness became harmless. Welcome to Echoes of the Old World. To understand the man behind the myth, you must understand the world that shaped him. The Roman Empire was fading into fragments, its gods dethroned, its streets filled with famine and plague. Christianity was still a faith of blood and conviction, a faith that demanded sacrifice. Myra lay on the southern coast of what we now call Turkey, a place where the sun once drenched fields of grain, but had turned cold under centuries of war. Sailors spoke of storms that came with the wrath of unseen powers, and every market still whispered the names of the old deities, even as the cross rose in their temples. Nicholas was born into that conflict, a child of wealth and faith in a city where both could cost you your life. His parents were devout and charitable, giving food to the poor and gold to the sick. Yet even in his youth, Nicholas felt the shadow of suffering heavy upon him. Some say he prayed not for joy, but for understanding, kneeling for hours in the cold stone chapel while others feasted. When his parents died in an epidemic, he inherited their fortune, but used none of it for comfort. He gave it away quietly, coin by coin, until all that remained was his calling. The people of Myra saw in him something both pure and unsettling. His generosity carried a sternness, a sense that every gift was weighed against eternity. He did not smile easily, nor did he speak much of love. Instead, he spoke of endurance, of standing unshaken while the world collapsed into decay. Those who watched him pass in the streets often lowered their eyes, unsure if they were in the presence of a man or a warning. In a time when religion could damn as swiftly as it could save, Nicholas embodied both the terror and the promise of the divine. The winters were cruel then, food was scarce, and faith was what people clung to when their breath turned to ice. Nicholas visited the hungry in secret, leaving bread at doors before dawn, knocking only once before vanishing into fog. He refused to allow despair to claim his city, even as he wrestled inwardly with visions of decay and temptation. It was said that sometimes, by candlelight, he would stare into the flame until dawn. And those who entered found him murmuring verses like exorcisms. He was a man of contradictions, tenderness veined with iron. One night, a storm tore across the coast. Ships were shattered like toys against the rocks, and the cries of the drowning reached the hills. The people ran to the docks, praying to any god who might listen. But amid the chaos, Nicholas appeared, cloak slashed by the wind, his voice rising louder than the tempest. He prayed, commanded, and defied. When the sea calmed, survivors claimed they had seen a figure walking on the waves beside their wrecked vessel. Hood drawn low, face illuminated by lightning. Whether that vision was man or miracle, no one ever knew. In the years that followed, the tales of his power multiplied. Some said he calmed seas, others that he struck down injustice with righteous fury. The truth, as always, hides in the space between worship and memory. But as his influence grew, so too did his burden. To be seen as a vessel of God meant to bear guilt for every tragedy and every unanswered prayer. And as the city of Myra began to thrive again, its people forgot the hunger that had once defined them. They remembered gifts, but not the pain that birthed them. Nicholas, however, did not forget. He saw shadow in celebration, pride in gratitude, and danger in comfort. He began to preach against wealth and vanity with a severity that frightened even the faithful. Temples once rededicated to Christ stood empty, and merchants whispered that the bishop's sermons made gold seem cursed. Yet Nicholas believed that mercy without fear was hollow. To love God, he often said, was to tremble before him. It is hard now to imagine that man standing beside the plump, laughing figure we call Santa Claus. But that transformation, from austere saint to jolly spirit, was not born overnight. It began in places like Myra, where hunger met holiness and superstition clung to hope like frost to olive leaves. In his devotion, Nicholas inherited the mantle of ancient gods of the sea and winter. Poseidon's dominion, Saturn's melancholy, Odin's wandering benevolence. Each culture layered its longing upon his name until he became a mirror for whatever people most desired in the cold months: salvation, presence, forgiveness. But in this chapter of his life, before legend softened his edges, Nicholas was a man alone under a merciless sky. His robes were threadbare, his hands weathered by the salt wind, his nights sleepless. The city that adored him often feared him still. His blessing could feel like a sentence, his silence like disfavor. When plague returned, rumors claimed he had walked into the graveyards to pray among the dead. And yet, dawn always found him alive, his eyes reflecting something deeper than exhaustion, a faith that bordered on defiance. The silent winter of Myra became an age-anchoring legend. Children would one day hear only of the man who offered gifts, but the elders would remember the stillness before that myth took shape. They would tell of nights when the bishop's footsteps echoed through frost, of mornings when bread appeared mysteriously at their doors. They would not speak of the tears he shed alone in the chapel, or the weight of the voices he heard in prayer. Some stories are too fragile to carry through time unchanged. Why does his beginning matter? Because beneath every joyous myth lies a core of sorrow, a truth that lends meaning to the light. The gift without the grief is empty. The laughter without the silence is shallow. Nicholas understood this, and perhaps this is why his legend endures. In him, the people of Myra saw not only generosity, but the eternal struggle to keep faith alive when the world goes dark. When you next hear his name, recall the winter his faith was forged. Picture the city beneath the moon, the bishop's shadow against the snow, the sea whispering his prayers back to him. Remember that what became Santa Claus once walked through hunger, loss, and solitude to find redemption. He did not invent joy without first confronting despair. That is the truth behind the silence of Myra. If you found meaning in this descent into the past, take a moment to leave a light on for the next traveler. Subscribe, share, and tell me. What do you think? Is generosity still sacred when it no longer remembers its pain? Until next time, keep the candle lit. This has been Echoes of the Old World. Imagine this: a narrow street in Myra under a moonless sky. The smell of brine and iron lingers in the cold air, and the flickering light of oil lamps paints trembling halos on the walls. You walk past shuttered market stalls and hear only the sea murmuring beyond the stone quay. Somewhere behind closed doors, prayers whisper of hunger, fear, and lost children. And in the distance, the cathedral bell tolls once, a sound that feels less like time passing and more like judgment arriving. You have heard of this story, though not in its true form. The verses in old hymns called it a miracle of mercy, a saint's triumph over death. But beneath the gilded icons and holiday songs lies something raw and unsettling, a legend rooted in famine and despair. It tells of innocence lost to human cruelty, and of a man who refused to ignore the shadows even when the world begged him to keep them buried. This is not a tale for children. It is a testament to how even holiness wears the scent of decay. The city of Myra, still trembling after years of war and sickness, had fallen into want. Grain ships rarely reached its harbor, and the markets lay empty by dawn. Parents bartered heirlooms for flour, and the cries of the hungry echoed down the alleys. That winter, desperation became a beast with many faces, and one of them wore the mask of greed. In that bleak season, Nicholas walked from house to house, carrying what little bread he could find. The people called him the light in their darkness, though even he could feel that his faith was being tested by shadows older than his prayers. Then came the story of the children. It began as rumor, a whisper that 3 young travelers had vanished near an inn at the edge of the market. Days later, a widow claimed to see lights in the cellar there long after midnight. Some dismissed it as gossip, but the unease spread quickly. The bishop, always drawn to the silent corners of suffering, decided to visit the place himself. He arrived with no fanfare, only a lantern in his hand and the authority of silence in his eyes. The innkeeper met him at the door, outwardly courteous, but pale with worry. The air inside smelled faintly of salt and smoke. Nicholas moved through the hall slowly, his fingers tracing the walls as if reading the memory of the building. The cellar steps creaked under his feet, and the chill that met him below passed like the breath of the grave. In the center of the cellar stood barrels of brine, used to preserve meat for the harsh months ahead. His lantern light glimmered across their surfaces like trembling tears. The legend says that Nicholas set the lamp down and bowed his head to pray. It is said he heard faint voices, children's voices, from beneath the lids of the barrels. Whether this was divine revelation or the echo of conscience, no one can say. But what followed became one of the oldest and most disturbing miracles of Christendom. The bishop lifted his hand in the sign of the cross, and the barrels splintered open as if struck from within. Out came the children, pale, cold, yet breathing. The tale is told differently from mouth to mouth. Some say the children simply awoke as if from a sleep, their bodies whole and untouched. Others whisper that they were shadows, spirits briefly rejoined with flesh before vanishing into the dawn. The church later softened the imagery, transforming it into a parable about resurrection and compassion. But in the earliest tellings, people did not call it resurrection. They called it reanimation, a return from the threshold between grace and horror. Nicholas brought the children to the church and prayed over them until sunrise. When their families heard, they came running, barefoot over the frost, weeping with awe and terror alike. No one could look into the bishop's eyes for long. Something in them seemed too vast, too knowing, as though he had stared directly into the machinery of death and forced it to turn backward. The miracle spread across Lycia, carried by sailors and merchants, changing with every retelling but always leaving the same chill in its wake. To the people, Nicholas's power confirmed his sanctity. To Nicholas himself, it cemented his burden. The image of the children haunted him, not as a triumph, but as a warning. Life and death, he realized, were not walls but doors, and no mortal should knock upon them lightly. He did not speak publicly about what he had seen or done, only urged the city to give thanks and live kindly. Yet those who worked close to him said he sometimes woke in the middle of the night, whispering prayers that sounded more like apologies. The miracle changed the city's relationship with holiness. Myra had long known faith as a system of rules and fear, but now it feared compassion itself. Uncertain where the line between mercy and magic lay, the bishop's touch became both blessing and taboo. Mothers pressed their children to his robes for protection, yet some avoided meeting his gaze, as if afraid that his eyes might see too much. The story spread beyond the coasts, reaching Byzantium, Constantinople, and far-off villages where the hunger for wonders outweighed the hunger for bread. Centuries later, artists carved Nicholas in mosaics and icons, his hand raised above 3 small figures standing in a tub. The image became a symbol of innocence restored, an emblem of protection. Few recognized the darker symbolism, the barrel of preservation, the brine of death turned into life. Even fewer remembered that Myra had survived those winters only because fear was heavier than famine. The story's power lay not in what it revealed, but in what it allowed people to forget. In truth, the legend mirrors the ancient pattern of many old faiths. From Egypt to Greece, gods were said to bring life out of the sealed vessel, light out of the underworld. Resurrection was never a gentle act. It was theft from eternity. Nicholas inherited that archetype not through intention, but through destiny. The miracle of the children elevated him into the realm of the mythic, yet it also severed him from the simple humanity he once had. After that winter, the people no longer saw him as a man. They saw him as a bridge between what lived and what had been lost. And what of the innkeeper, you might wonder? In later retellings, he confessed his crime and repented, forgiven by the saint who saved his victims. But older accounts suggest something stranger, that Nicholas did not condemn him, nor demand penance. Instead, he ordered him to feed the poor until the end of his days. To some, that was mercy. To others, it was a sentence more enduring than death. For Nicholas, justice and forgiveness were never opposites. They were two sides of the same sacred wound. As the years passed, pilgrims came to Myra to weep over the miracle's memory. They brought gifts, offerings of salt and candles, believing that the brine which once held death now sanctified their prayers. The city prospered again, but Nicholas grew quieter, more introspective. He no longer sought miracles, he sought understanding. When the people asked why he seemed distant, he told them that every blessing carries a shadow, and that even divine mercy demands its own kind of sacrifice. The miracle had not healed him. It had merely reminded him how fragile salvation truly is. If you look at old churches in Europe or Russia, you'll find scenes carved above the doors: 3 children, a bishop, and a broken barrel. They smile, but the background is always dark, as if remembering what they escaped. Those carvings endure because beauty and fear share the same root. The miracle of the pickled children became the foundation of Nicholas's sainthood. But its essence was never about victory over death. It was about the horror that compassion sometimes requires. To understand the real Santa Claus, the ancient one, you must remember that his miracles were born not in joy, but in grief. The man who saved those children was the same man who wept for the hungry and stood unflinching before the abyss. The myth of the miracle hides a truth humanity rarely wants to face: that love without suffering is hollow, and faith without fear is fragile. When you see the smiling saint on stained glass, imagine for a moment the silence of that cellar, the cold barrels, the trembling light of the lamp revealing both salvation and its cost. The story may comfort, but it should also disturb. Because the figure who would one day become the generous Santa Claus began his legend not with laughter, but with the reclamation of lost souls from salt and darkness. His faith walked hand in hand with terror, his kindness with pain. And that contradiction, the mercy that gazes back into horror, is what turned a man into myth. The miracle of the pickled children is not just a pious legend. It is a mirror showing the price of compassion. So the next time you hear his name in songs of joy, remember Myra's winter cellar and the voice that would not let death keep what it had claimed. And ask yourself, where does salvation end and interference begin? When does a miracle cross the line between divine and forbidden? Perhaps Nicholas never knew. Perhaps that is why his shadow still lingers each December, reminding us that even the brightest saints are born from the darkest nights. If you found worth in this remembrance, leave your mark upon the flame. Subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments, where do you draw the boundary between mercy and the fear it awakens? Until next time, let the candle burn. This has been Echoes of the Old World. Picture this: the council hall of Myra, lit by torches that bleed smoke into the air. The year is the beginning of the 4th century, and the empire trembles like a beast caught between faiths. The marble floor is cracked from years of footsteps, and the scent of sweat and wax thickens the room. At its center stands Nicholas, not the giver of gifts, but the guardian of doctrine, the bishop whose silence weighs heavier than any sermon. You stand among the clergy, watching as voices rise in heated contention. Scripture and heresy blur in the din, each priest fighting to carve truth from chaos. The emperor's envoys wait in the shadows, their armor glinting faintly, symbols of a state desperate for unity. And then Nicholas speaks. His words are sparse but sharp, each one falling like a hammer striking the anvil of history. The hall stills. For the first time in years, no one breathes. You have heard that he was kind, that he was gentle, that his hand blessed more than it condemned. But the truth is colder. Nicholas was a man of absolute conviction, forged in the age when doubt meant damnation. His compassion, though genuine, was bound to obedience. The bishop's mercy ended where truth began, and truth to him was carved in stone. This is not the picture on your holiday cards. This is the man who stood unblinking before kings and heretics alike. Before we proceed down this path of fractures and flame, I ask something of you. If you believe that history's sharp edges deserve to be remembered, help us keep the candle lit. Subscribe, share, and stand with us as we open these old wounds of faith and fury. Your support keeps this archive alive, allowing us to journey deeper into the labyrinth of belief where saints and monsters share the same face. This chapter will lead us into the chambers of ecclesiastical power, where Nicholas's faith hardened into steel. We will witness his defiance against pagan rites, his confrontation with the forces that sought to twist the gospel, and his role in the council that would define centuries of belief. Finally, we will ask how holiness can turn so easily into judgment. Let us begin. To understand the bishop's transformation, we must grasp the world's agony. The Roman Empire was no longer one empire, but two. The East baptized by Byzantium's light, the West sinking under its own weight. The old gods had not vanished. They lingered in festivals, in shrines, in the hearts of farmers who still poured wine upon stones for fortune and fire. Christianity was legal, but not united. Every interpretation bred a new sect, every preacher a rival truth. This chaos did not frighten Nicholas. It enraged him. In his view, the divine could not be fractured. To abandon unity was to invite darkness into the soul. When the heretic Arius began preaching that Christ was not equal to God, but a created being, Nicholas saw not debate, but blasphemy. The dispute reached every corner of the empire, setting believers against believers like wolves in a cage. Myra became a battleground of ideas, its streets echoing with strange chants and fearful prayers. Nicholas neither negotiated nor tolerated. He prepared for war, not of sword, but of will. The stories tell of the council at Nicaea, where bishops gathered from across the empire under Emperor Constantine's watchful gaze. Some came seeking harmony, others revenge. The room was stifling, thick with incense and rivalry. Arius stood before them, eloquent, unbowed, his words shimmering with logic. Many listened, nodding in thought. But Nicholas's eyes gleamed with quiet fury. For him, the argument was not intellectual. It was eternal. The divine mystery was not for debate. The legend says he crossed the floor and struck Arius across the face. Whether that moment truly happened or lived only in later imagination, history remembers it as truth. That act defined him, not as a warm saint, but as the bishop whose hand could bless or condemn with equal force. His peers dragged him from the assembly, his office stripped, his vestments removed. But as the night passed, they claimed his chains vanished and his robe was restored by unseen hands. Whether miracle or myth, the message was clear. Even heaven seemed to favor his violence. To the modern mind, such fury seems unholy. Yet in the 4th century, faith was war, and peace was bought in blood and conviction. Nicholas's hand at Nicaea symbolized more than anger. It was the strike of a man unwilling to see the divine turned into theory. In a world where doctrines could shatter kingdoms, his iron will preserved the fragile unity of belief. He did not see himself as cruel, only as necessary. Mercy to Nicholas meant salvation through discipline. Back in Myra, his authority grew absolute. His sermons no longer comforted, they commanded. He destroyed idols left in forgotten shrines, had pagan temples dismantled stone by stone, and forbade festivals that blended old and new faiths. The olive groves that once ran red with sacrifices were purified, the fires quenched in the name of righteousness. To his followers, he was the arm of God. To his enemies, he was judgment in flesh. Yet even his fiercest critics admitted his incorruptibility. Gold could not tempt him, nor could power soften his austerity. Still, the cost of such purity is isolation. Nicholas began to move like a figure caught between dimensions, half on earth, half in eternity. He performed his priestly duties with exact precision, but spoke seldom of joy. Children still approached him, trusting the warmth beneath his sternness, yet his eyes remained distant. He was a shepherd haunted by wolves only he could see. Holiness had become a cage, and the closer he drew to God, the further he drifted from the people he sought to save. The bishop's iron hand shaped not only his congregation, but the image of Christian virtue itself. He turned reverence into a moral weapon, compassion into responsibility. He taught that forgiveness required confession, and love demanded consequence. The faithful learned to fear sin more than pain, to obey before they understood. Under his guidance, the city grew orderly, devout, and silent. The laughter of old pagan feasts faded like smoke. And in that silence, holiness became indistinguishable from fear. It is easy now to judge him, to call him severe or fanatical. But Nicholas was the product of a world at war with itself. When every soul's eternity hung in the balance, compromise felt like betrayal. To falter was to let the ancient gods reclaim the earth. In that darkness, conviction was light. The bishop's iron hand was not born from hatred, but from love hardened by necessity. His faith demanded he wield both the blessing and the blade. Yet the deeper tragedy of his life was this. In defending the sacred, he turned into its guardian and its prisoner. Though his name would one day soften into saint, the man himself never escaped the weight of judgment. Late in his life, when illness weakened him, he wandered through the cathedral at night, running his fingers across the stone pillars as if feeling their sins. Witnesses swore they heard him whisper, "Lord, if I have saved them, have I lost you?" No one knows the answer he received. As the empire shifted and centuries unfolded, Nicholas's stern visage blurred into something gentler. Artists painted him smiling, poets sang of his kindness, and merchants found in his legend a symbol of giving. The iron hand became a gloved one. Yet, beneath that transformation, the seed of his old resolve remained. Every gift in his name, every act of generosity, carries the echo of that uncompromising faith. Behind each whisper of saint, there lies the voice that once thundered in Nicaea. So when you imagine Saint Nicholas bending over children with gifts, remember also the bishop who struck down heresy with bare hands. His legacy is not a contradiction, it is a continuum. The joy we associate with his name is the harvest of fear and devotion, sown in darker soil. Without his iron will, the faith that shaped the world might have shattered into dust. The man beneath the myth reminds us that idealism can become tyranny, and conviction can burn brighter than compassion. And yet, perhaps, in the crucible of those extremes, holiness finds its truest form. Nicholas's hand, capable of both blessing and striking, was never divided. It was complete. He believed that to heal the world, one must first confront the rot that lies beneath its smile. If this story has stirred a glimpse of that old fire within you, help us keep the candle lit. Subscribe, share, and tell me what you think. Was Nicholas a saint defending truth or a zealot blinded by conviction? Until next time, let the shadows remind you that faith, like flame, can warm or burn. This has been Echoes of the Old World. Picture this: a night on the coast of Lycia, centuries before Christmas ever existed. The air is thick with smoke and pine. An orange firelight shimmers across the sea. Men and women stand in circles, their faces lit by flame, calling to the old gods of winter. You can hear the crackle of kindling, the murmur of chants older than the language you know. And in that ancient darkness, a priest drops the last offering into the fire. A handful of grain, a whispered name. And the smoke rises toward indifferent stars. The scene feels timeless because it is. Long before carols or holly, before nativity scenes or stockings, the turning of the year belonged to the gods of frost and flame. Winter, in its endless hunger, was worshipped as both enemy and deliverer. In the north, the people called upon Odin, the wanderer who rode the storm winds. In the south, they honored Poseidon, whose wrath could sink fleets or bless fishermen. Across Rome, Saturn's feast turned the world upside down for a brief, drunken mercy. And far from all of them, in the quiet province of Myra, Nicholas watched these fires dim. You have been told that Santa Claus came from Christian charity, a saint shaping joy out of faith. But that is only half the truth. His image grew not in isolation, but in fusion, emerging from the bones of older deities buried beneath the church's hymns. The red robes, the gifts, the winter's journey. They did not start with Bethlehem. They came from the solstice fires, from the gods who refused to die. What the world calls Christmas was once a battlefield between gods and saints. Before we continue, I ask you to do something simple yet sacred. If you believe that forgotten myths deserve more than silence, keep the candle burning. Subscribe, share this story, and join us as we walk into the smoke where memory meets belief. Your light allows us to descend into the archives that the centuries buried beneath garland and snow. Tonight, we will travel across centuries of syncretism, where pagan fires met Christian altars and neither truly surrendered. We will trace how Nicholas of Myra absorbed the faces of ancient gods, Odin, Poseidon, Saturn, and became a bridge between worlds. And we will ask what was gained and lost when the church turned fear into festivity. This is not the story of Christmas. This is the story of transformation, sacrifice, and survival. After the Council of Nicaea, Nicholas's voice carried beyond Lycia. Sailors carved his image onto their ships, praying not to drown. Mothers kept small effigies of him near cradles. He became a saint of safety, a patron of travelers. But that same sea had belonged for centuries to Poseidon, lord of waves and tempests. Sailors could not simply abandon their god, so they renamed him. The trident turned into a bishop's staff. The sea god's temper softened into the saint's mercy. In the prayers of the fearful, Poseidon lived on, disguised in Christian robes. In the frozen north, where Nicholas's name reached through trade and rumor, another transformation began. The Norse people already had their winter father, Odin, the All-Father, the one-eyed wanderer whose spectral procession raced through the Yule skies. He rode an 8-legged horse that galloped over rooftops, bringing blessings or curses according to who honored him. When Christianity arrived, priests spoke of Saint Nicholas traveling by night, rewarding the good and punishing the wicked. The horse became reindeer. The wild hunt became benevolence. But the pattern endured. It is not holiness that shapes myth. It is memory adapting to survive. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Rome, winter belonged to Saturn, the god of time, of the Golden Age forgotten. His festival, Saturnalia, turned society upside down. Masters served slaves, laws vanished, and joy replaced toil, if only for a week. The church could not erase such ecstasy, so it transfigured it. Saturn's laughter was baptized as celebration, and Nicholas, already burdened with the mantle of mercy, inherited Saturn's role as patron of feasting and reversal. What was once ritual chaos became temporary kindness. The saint's gift-giving replaced the golden god's indulgence. But the feeling remained the same. Humanity's need to dance on the edge of ruin. Throughout the Mediterranean, whispers of this merging grew. The people prayed to Nicholas, but their minds still saw the shapes of gods behind his eyes. When storms broke, they felt Poseidon's vengeance. When snow fell quietly, they imagined Odin's beard brushing the clouds. The church might have claimed victory, yet beneath its hymns, older rhythms pulsed. The saint did not conquer the gods. He became their vessel. To worship him was to appease both heaven and the ghosts of the pagan world. Nicholas himself would never know this transformation. When he died in the early 4th century, his bones were placed in Myra's cathedral, glowing faintly with reverence and rumor. People said a fragrant oil seeped from his relics, a holy liquid called manna, believed to heal the sick. It drew pilgrims from every corner of the known world, until his tomb became a shrine as powerful as any oracle. Yet even that sanctity carried echoes of the ancient. Oil had always been the blood of gods, poured out in sacrifice or prophecy. The past lived on through the saint's remains, disguised in the language of miracles. As time reshaped the empire, myths traveled faster than armies. Merchants and monks carried Nicholas's story along trade routes, and each land dressed him in its own symbols. In the east, he remained the solemn bishop of Myra. In the west, he became the spectral gift-bringer of the frozen wilderness. By the 10th century, he was celebrated across Europe, though few remembered his origin. Candles replaced torches, prayers replaced chants, but the purpose was unchanged: to invite warmth into a season of hunger and loss. But this merging came at a cost. The gods who had once stood for his balance became blunted into moral archetypes. Odin, who held wisdom and darkness alike, was split. His insight given to saints, his chaos condemned as devilry. Saturn's defiant joy was tamed into charity, Poseidon's wrath buried under hymns of peace. And Nicholas, caught at the center, became both priest and pawn. His legend purified for worshippers who feared the wildness of their ancestors. The new faith inherited power, yet it lost awe. Still, beneath the Gothic cathedrals and illuminated manuscripts, you can feel the pulse of older rhythms. The bells that ring on Christmas Eve once rang to mark the solstice. The candles by the altar once guarded against the dead, walking in winter's shadow. Even the fir tree, its needles shimmering with frost, belongs to those first worshippers who saw in its defiance of winter the promise of life reborn. When you trace the lineage of the holiday, every garland hides a ghost. Nicholas's metamorphosis into a mythic figure was complete when his relics were stolen from Myra and brought to Bari centuries later. The theft was painted as divine will, a rescue from Turkish invaders. But beneath the piety lingered something older, the belief that gods must be moved to remain alive. Pilgrims came, bearing candles, singing hymns that lingered between prayer and spell. Once again, Nicholas became a bridge, not between merely faiths, but between eras. Pagan and Christian, myth and doctrine, flesh and legend. He became the eternal mediator. In the northern lands, that bridge manifested every winter. The church allowed festivals honoring St. Nicholas on the eve of early December. But in quiet corners, far from Rome's oversight, the old rites endured. Villagers left out hay for the saint's steed, a relic of Odin's horse. They whispered prayers to protect their homes from spirits roaming the icy roads. And under soft candlelight, parents told their children that Nicholas would judge their year, not as a man, but as something larger and ancient. The saint and the god had become indistinguishable. The irony is that this fusion, once feared by theologians, ensured the saint's immortality. Without Odin's shadow, he might have remained a forgotten relic of Byzantium. Without Saturn's joy, his feast might have stayed austere. Without Poseidon's sea, his miracles would never have crossed continents. The pantheon of winter became his inheritance, and through him, its memory survived even as its altars crumbled. When we light fires today, when we hang ornaments and sing of goodwill, we repeat rituals older than we admit. Nicholas's name lends them sanctity, but their roots are tangled in the soil of forgotten myths. The saint did not erase the gods. He carried them quietly within him, as all new faiths carry the bones of the old. And perhaps that is the secret of his endurance. He belongs to every age because he belongs to all that came before. What is holiness if not transformation? What is faith if not memory preserved through disguise? The journey from pagan fires to Christian altars was never about victory. It was about survival. The same hunger that makes us light candles against the dark, hoping someone or something still listens. Nicholas's legend endures because it satisfies both halves of the human soul. The half that prays for salvation, and the half that still remembers the gods who once walked the earth. If this exploration has kindled a spark in you, let it not fade. Subscribe, share, and tell me, do you think faith and myth are enemies? Or two names for the same yearning? Until next time, keep your candles burning through the longest night. This has been Echoes of the Old World. Picture this. The year is the 17th century, and snow drifts quietly over the rooftops of Amsterdam. Candles flicker in narrow windows, and a warm glow spills onto frozen canals. You can smell the scent of cloves and burning pine. Inside a small home, a child wakes to find a gift, a single orange wrapped in cloth, placed by his bed in the night. The mother smiles, whispering that St. Nicholas has passed through. It is a gentle image, the kind that comforts even now. But beneath its softness lies something deliberate, something constructed. The figure who leaves gifts in secret is no longer the same Nicholas of Myra. This version was reshaped, stripped of austerity, dressed in warmth and legend. The man who once walked among ruins had been remade into a myth that could survive commerce, empire, and indulgence. The saint had become a symbol, and symbols, unlike men, never die. You've seen this transformation, even if you didn't know it. The robes turned crimson, the bishop's mitre vanished, and the voice that once thundered with judgment became laughter. The church's saint softened into a spirit welcome in every hearth. What began as ritual remembrance turned into something larger, the birth of Santa Claus, the patron not of faith but of festivity. But while the world celebrates this creation with joy, his origin whispers of control, manipulation, and forgetting. Before we unwrap that illusion, pause for a moment. If you believe that hidden histories deserve their voice, join us in keeping the candle burning. Subscribe, share, and let the memory of truth survive beneath the snow of myth. Your support allows us to keep walking this fragile path between legend and the long forgotten. Tonight, we'll descend into the crucible of storytelling where church, commerce, and culture fused to create a figure both divine and harmless. We will trace how St. Nicholas became Sinterklaas, then Santa Claus, the journey from holy relic to holiday mascot. And we will ask why humanity prefers its saints stripped of struggle and sanctified by sugar. The seeds of transformation were sown in Europe's slow awakening from the Middle Ages. As commerce expanded, new ports thrived, and the myths of saints became part of the currencies they traded. In the Netherlands, sailors carried tales of their patron protector, St. Nicholas, across oceans. But prosperity loves joy, not penance. The stern bishop who defended orthodoxy no longer fit a world of merchants seeking fortune. To survive, his image adapted. Out went the iron hand, in came the open palm. The Dutch molded him into Sinterklaas, a figure who rode the clouds on a white horse, bringing small gifts to those who obeyed and warnings to those who did not. He arrived not in sacred silence, but amid laughter and song. Yet even this mirth hid stratified purpose. The church encouraged the festival to bind the people together, to replace the pagan Yule with a Christian celebration of giving. Tradition softened, but control deepened. And over time, the edges of holiness blurred. When Dutch settlers crossed the ocean to the New World, they carried Sinterklaas with them. But America, vast and untamed, reshaped every imported faith. It thrived on reinvention, and so the saint began to change once again. In this new land, commerce reigned where theology waned. Festivals of devotion turned slowly into markets of cheer. Newspapers rewrote his story. Poets dressed him in fur. Artists painted his cheeks red with mirth instead of frostbite. The bishop's crozier transformed into a candy cane, his miracles into marketing. In New York, the 19th century sculpted the Santa we now know. A culture hungry for identity found comfort in rewriting holiness as happiness. Clement Clark Moore's poem immortalized him as a jolly traveler with reindeer and a sack of toys. What began as hagiography ended as advertising. Each retelling stripped away a shadow until nothing remained of the grave bishop who once walked through plague, storm, and sorrow. In his place rose a spirit who knew neither suffering nor doubt, a saint sterilized by sweetness. And yet, the mask of joy conceals what it replaces. The myths of generosity that surround him are not false, but hollowed. The true Nicholas gave until he starved, prayed until his body broke. His miracles grew from struggle, his charity from grief. But modern comfort thrives on illusions unburdened by pain. The saint of Myra gave away his gold. The Santa of Coca-Cola sells it back. The exchange was complete. The empire reclaimed the myth as product. Still, within this transformation lies a paradox deeper than cynicism. Humanity has always needed symbols of light, even if their fires burn differently through ages. Nicholas's metamorphosis into Santa was also survival. Proof that faith, however corrupted, adapts to endure. When one age outgrows penance, it invents joy. When reverence sours into duty, laughter restores meaning. In that sense, the saint did not die. He was resurrected by those too weary to meet holiness face to face. But the cost of immortality is dilution. The frost that once bit the city of Myra now perfumes the snow of postcards. The miracles that once defied death now serve deadlines. The faces of children glow under synthetic lights. Unaware, they echo ancient prayers for mercy. The season that bears his name worships abundance and calls it grace. Somewhere, one imagines the real Nicholas watching, neither smiling nor condemning, only understanding the endless trade between faith and forgetfulness. Each century buried him deeper beneath celebration. The church declared him patron of sailors, of children, of nations, until the weight of titles became self-parody. By the Victorian era, his image had completed its metamorphosis from saint to caricature. Writers reinvented him as a creature of fantasy, a benevolent ghost of good fortune who asked nothing and gave everything. And when the industrial age demanded idols of consumption, Santa fit perfectly, a spirit that sold both joy and conformity. Yet, even beneath the velvet and the jingles, fragments of his origin remain. The midnight journey through rooftops recalls the bishop's secret charity. The judgment of naughty or nice echoes the moral parables of old sermons. The giving of gifts still traces back to the story of 3 dowries Nicholas offered in silence. Symbols mutate, but they never erase their beginnings entirely. The saint still whispers through the myth that replaced him, like the faint toll of a bell beneath a carol. Consider the duality of what he became. To the world, he is harmless, a portly keeper of joy. But archetypally, he remains a judge, a watcher who distinguishes virtue from deceit. Even in modern folklore, he is never alone. Shadows follow him. Krampus in the Alps, the Black Companion in Dutch ritual, nameless figures who remember the darker aspects of midwinter's rule. The saint's light, no matter how bright, casts the longest shadow. And perhaps that shadow is the only remnant of the truth we lost. The birth of Santa was not a miracle. It was a reconstruction. Each culture rebuilt him to its own comfort, sanding the edges until his story could sell. But all construction conceals a burial. In making him joyous, humanity entombed the parts of him that confronted fear and justice. The world can adore joy. It cannot endure holiness. The laughter of Santa mocks the silence of the bishop beneath. But without the silence, the laughter means nothing. It is easy to dismiss him now as myth, as a corporate relic. But when the snow falls and the lights flicker through frosted glass, something ancient stirs under the noise. The same hunger that turned sacrifice into celebration remains alive. The myth, however domesticated, preserves the ember of belief, that small defiance against despair. That, perhaps, is the miracle Nicholas always sought to teach. Not that light destroys darkness, but that it learns to live beside it. And so, the mask of joy endures. The red suit is the latest skin over centuries of transformation, each layer hiding yet preserving the truth beneath. We paint him smiling because we fear what would happen if we looked behind the beard and saw the silence of Myra once more. Yet somewhere deep within those stories of sleigh bells and snow, the real Nicholas remains, patient, enduring, waiting to be remembered. If you found meaning in this unraveling of joy, help us keep the candle burning in the frost. Subscribe, share, and tell me, in a world that has turned saints into stories, do you think we still believe in sacrifice? Until next time, may light and shadow share your hearth. This has been Echoes of the Old World. Imagine this: late December, the world wrapped in white silence. The snow falls without hurry, each flake drifting like ash from a long-forgotten pyre. Lights glitter in windows, laughter rises from houses, and everything feels gentle, safe, blessed. You walk alone down a quiet street, the cold biting your cheeks, the hum of music echoing from somewhere you cannot see. But beneath the beauty lingers something older, an unease as ancient as winter itself. That feeling, that faint shiver behind the warmth, is the oldest part of Christmas. It is not the sparkle, but the shadow that remembers why the lights were lit. For millennia, people feared this season because the sun grew weak, the days shortened, and life itself seemed to hold its breath. To survive those nights, they built myths, not of gifts, but of guardians. And Saint Nicholas, for all his kindness, was one of them. A shepherd against the dark, a sentinel standing between the living and what waited in the cold. You have seen what he has become, a symbol of abundance and laughter, but every smile cast in his name hides a memory of his gaze upon suffering. The real Nicholas lived through famine, plague, and loss. He gave because he had seen the abyss firsthand. The spirit we celebrate now mimics his generosity, but forgets his fear. Joy without its origin in grief becomes decoration. And so, we wrap tragedy in tinsel, mistaking amnesia for peace. Before we follow that shadow further, I ask something of you. If you believe memory deserves its guardians, join us. Subscribe, share, and keep the candle burning in this long night. Each act of remembrance is defiance against forgetting. Your light keeps this archive alive. Your attention holds open the door to the old world, hidden behind the snow. Tonight, we will linger not in the legend, but in its echo, the reflection of Saint Nicholas in our modern hearts. We will trace how his silence became laughter, how faith became ritual, and how myth became mirror. Then, when the lights go out, we will ask what remains of the man beneath the mask. To understand the shadow, you must understand the cost of light. Every culture that adopted Nicholas reshaped him to comfort their own fear of death and winter. He became a bearer of joy precisely because he once carried sorrow. Yet with time, comfort grew complacent. The darkness he held at bay was forgotten, and the saint who had once wrestled with despair was reborn as a creature of perpetual grace. But does not surrender so easily. Where faith builds a figure of kindness, myth always leaves a counterpart. Where there is a giver, there must be a taker. Across the world, older figures still haunt the edges of the holiday. Krampus, who punishes, Pershta, who judges, the Yule cat, who devours the lazy. These are not strangers to Nicholas. They are his shadows. They are the remnants of the balance his story erased. For centuries, people needed both mercy and fear to survive the winter. When the saint monopolized goodness, the darkness was forced underground, where it hardened into superstition. The modern season hides them behind fairy lights, but they remain, whispering in the howling wind. If you listen carefully, you can still hear it. The tension between gift and guilt, between charity and control. Even now, parents use his story to teach morality. He sees you when you're sleeping, they say. He knows if you've been bad or good. Once those words meant salvation, now they echo with surveillance. Every myth that survives becomes a mechanism for power. The smile of Santa conceals the stern judgment of the bishop. The same gaze that once condemned heresy and blessed mercy by the same hand. The saint's watchfulness has become discipline wrapped in joy. And yet, there is something profoundly human in that contradiction. We cannot separate our longing for kindness from our fear of punishment. We crave miracles, but we demand consequences. Nicholas embodies that duality perfectly. He forgave, but his forgiveness required repentance. He gave, but his giving demanded humility. His faith was not sentimental, it was sacrificial. When myth dulled those edges, it also dulled the truth that love and fear are siblings, not foes. The snow deepens as you walk farther through this imagined night. Around you, the houses glow like altars, but between them, the streets stretch empty, endless. The silence feels alive, listening. You realize how thin the boundary is between celebration and superstition, between the divine and the mundane. The same candle that warms can also reveal what hides in the dark. Perhaps that was always Nicholas's purpose, not to banish the shadow, but to remind humanity that it never truly leaves. In that realization lies the true legacy of his myth. Every December, when the world rehearses its rituals of generosity, we repeat the structure of his story. We descend into darkness, gather what warmth we can, and emerge together into light. It is an ancient rhythm, a psychological pilgrimage. The decorations, the songs, the feasts, they are not meaningless frivolities, but echoes of survival. What we call joy is the oldest act of rebellion against despair. But rebellion demands awareness, and awareness requires remembrance. The real Saint Nicholas belongs to history's scarred side, not its polished one. He knew that faith hardened by suffering becomes lasting hope, while comfort without struggle erodes into vanity. His presence in winter was not just about giving, but about endurance, the preservation of spirit when the body and world seem to wither. Today we imitate his actions, but forget his intent. Some say that myths survive because they adapt. I believe they survive because they hide truths too heavy to face directly. Nicholas is no longer the austere bishop of Myra. Yet through his annual resurrection, he still teaches the same lesson. Abundance exists only by contrast to loss. The feast matters because hunger once haunted it. The laughter of children means something because once he wept for those who had none. The snow's beauty is born of the death it conceals. The bells you hear each winter toll for memory as much as for celebration. Their chime binds centuries together. The prayers of sailors, the hopes of orphans, the gratitude of those who survived another year. Every carol that fills the air is an echo of hymns once sung to ward away famine and plague. When we sing of peace on earth, we unconsciously summon that long chain of human longing. And through it all, Nicholas endures, less a man and more a collective wish embodied in crimson cloth. Yet, there remains a caution in his story. When humanity forgets the cost of light, it turns faith into spectacle. When we worship the symbol but ignore the sacrifice, we lose connection with the force that first gave it meaning. Nicholas's transformation into Santa reflects that drift. It is easier to adorn the holy than to understand it, easier to commercialize kindness than to practice it. The myth survives, but its purpose fades. Only by remembering the shadow beneath it can we redeem its truth. So picture once more the city of Myra, centuries buried beneath ruins and memory. Its stones still rest under the same stars that now shine over your home. Somewhere within them lies the dust of a man whose generosity defied death, whose faith confronted fear. His bones may have been moved, his name remade, but his silence still echoes through the world's winter nights. Every flicker of candlelight, every act of giving carries part of his endurance. That, perhaps, is immortality, not worship, but remembrance. Close your eyes and imagine that stillness. The snow keeps falling, endless, indifferent. The world sleeps, believing itself safe. And yet, somewhere deep within the season's heart, his shadow watches still, not as threat, but as reminder. For without shadow, there can be no illumination. Without sorrow, no joy. The man of Myra walks again each December, not in flesh, but in symbol, carrying both blessing and warning. He is the cold wind outside and the warmth inside, the hand that gives and the silence that judges. If you have found meaning in this journey through the snow, take a moment to keep its flame alive. Subscribe, share, and tell me, do you think the myths we keep alive truly protect us? Or do they only remind us of what we fear to face? Until next time, let your candle burn softly against the dark. And remember, the story of St. Nicholas is not about commerce or comfort. It is about endurance, about mercy, and the shadow beneath the snow. This has been Echoes of the Old World.